Asian Languages and Cultural Studies Department. Oh, I'm supposed to record. Okay, it's recording. Very happy that we have a speaker, Professor Hongwei Bao from University of Nottingham in the UK. So this talk, we're grateful for sponsorship from the UC Santa Barbara Orfalea Center, directed by Paul Amar, and also the East Asia Center, co-directed by Xiaorong Li and Luke Roberts, and also the East Asian Languages and Cultural Studies Department. So wonderful. I first met Professor Bao when I was a Director of Asian Studies at University of Sydney. And indeed, I was on his PhD committee at University of Sydney. And back then, I already knew that he was somebody who would really go far. And certainly his publication record is very impressive. He directs the Center for Contemporary East Asian Cultural Studies at University of Nottingham. And he's the author of 4 monographs on Chinese queer culture. One book is Queer Comrades. His next book is Queer China, and then Queer Media in China, and Contemporary Chinese Queer Performance is his latest book. So a very impressive record, and we very much look forward to learning a great deal about the situation of LGBT and how they deploy media to create a community in China today. Thank you, Professor Bao, for appearing. Yeah, we look forward to it.
Thank you, Mayfair, for your very kind introduction. This brought me back so many nice memories from Sydney, and thank you for all your support all the year on. Let me share slides and then start my talk slowly. I hope everybody can see my slides in full screen. Is that showing? Okay, brilliant. So thank Professor Mayfair Yang for your kind invitation, and for the 2 centers and the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultural Studies and Ophelia Center for Global Studies and East Asia Center for co-sponsoring today's event. So I'll deliver a talk based on my latest publication, Queer Media in China, but I also actually reflect upon my research on queer Chinese histories and cultures overall. And then after that, there will be time for Q&A. So when you have questions, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A, and then we'll be able to answer some of the questions, hopefully all the questions, if time allows. So also thank Mayfair for creating this wonderful poster, and the picture on at least my left-hand side is used in the poster, which I think is very nice picture. It's very interesting. So this is a photo from a Pride March event that took place in Changsha in South China, Hunan province, actually in 2013. So what happened was that, Pride marches are very rare in China. This is because demonstrations and protests are banned in China, or you have to apply for the right to protest and demonstrate. And most of the time, your application would probably be rejected. And especially when LGBT rights were not recognized, it was impossible to gain approval to have such a demonstration or march. So this is a group of university students from a local university, and they belong to a student, LGBT student club. So what they did was that they were celebrating the Ada Hobbit Day, International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia on that day. So what they did was actually very, in a way, very modest actually by international standards, but very brave in Chinese standards. They walked along a river. So this is a riverbank, and you can see there are about 20 people. So they walked along the river waving rainbow flags, and rainbow flag, as many of you may know, is a symbol for LGBTQ, gender diversity and sexual diversity. And then they are also holding a banner here, which says 同志一番人. You probably cannot see the last 3 letters. It's these 3 letters, 同志一番人. So for those who are familiar with Chinese language, who read Chinese, 同志 literally means comrade. But here, of course, it doesn't mean comrade. It means gay or queer. So the term comrade in contemporary times has been used to refer to LGBTQ people. So in the Chinese language context, of course, this has a long history, and this has been covered in my first book based on my PhD thesis supervised by Professor Yang. So what I'll continue to explain the title. The title says 同志一番人 literally means comrades or LGBT people are also ordinary people. So that's what it literally means. It's a translation of an English phrase, which is called queer as folk. So which is the title of a British and American television series. So essentially they are using an international LGBT television series to name their slogan, 同志一番人. Our LGBT people are ordinary people. We're not diseased people. We are not, for example, monsters. Please treat us nicely. So this is a fair, modest phrase. And this phrase actually is also used to refer to a podcast or webcast, which is called 同志一番人, later translated into queer comrades. And I stole this line or appropriate this line for my book title. So 同志一番人 is a community webcast, so run by Chinese LGBT activists to document Chinese community historical events and history. So here we see 2 forms of queer community media. So one is an international LGBT television drama imported actually from America and UK. So in China, it's not officially imported, but people can still view it through bootleg DVDs or through, if you like, illegal or legal downstreaming. And there are also subtitling groups who has subtitled every episode. So that's one type of queer media. The other type of queer media is 同志一番人, queer comrades, which is a community-based webcast program that reports community news, that documents community histories. For example, they make talk show programs, they make community news, and they produce documentaries and short feature stories and so on. So that's considered to be queer community or independent media. So we have at least these type of community media or queer media in China. So let me actually say a few words about this picture. So after the group walked along the river actually for half an hour, and then they reached the other side of the street and decided to go to a restaurant and have some dinner. And they had a nice dinner and all went back to their dormitory. And that night, the organizer of the event, Xiang Xiaohan, was arrested by the police, and he was detained for 14 days and then released without charge. So after that, when media interviewed Xiang Xiaohan, and Xiang said that if 14 days was the price to pay for a pride parade, then it's worth it. I'm happy to do it again. But of course, the situation changes. There are many more things happening in China. At the moment, you know, the LGBT issues were particularly political sensitive. So such pride were and are no longer possible. But they actually demonstrate a type of queer activism that have been primarily imported from the West, the kind of pride parade model, as well as a kind of Stonewall type of politics. Whether they would work in China or not is a different matter. What are some of the more cultural specific and context-specific forms of activism that would work in China. And I will probably suggest in this talk that queer media, in particular, queer community media-based activism is one of the ways that are still possible that can articulate queer identities, politics, and communities. So as you may know that although homosexuality was in a way taboo in mainstream media representation, and LGBT representations are usually censored or banned in Chinese mainstream media. But still, you see a proliferation of homoerotic contents from butch lesbian type of reality TV contestants to the kind of boys' love type of TV dramas. So they really proliferated in Chinese mainstream media and in Chinese internet media, despite the recent crackdown on the Chinese streaming websites. So this is one type of queer community media, which I call hidden in the spotlight, which is that they are ubiquitous. They seem to be everywhere, but you just can't name them. People probably can guess who they are and what they're referring to, but nobody will say that this is gay, lesbian, LGBT, or queer. But of course, there's also another type that I mentioned, the queer community types of media that are used by a small group of people circulating within the queer communities and used for activist purposes. So this is a focus of my talk. That's also the focus for my book, Queer Media in China. One has to, in a way, define one's object to study. So I, in this study, really define the object to study as the community and activist use of media forms. But of course, all these media have different forms, from print media to electronic media to digital media and so on. So in today's talk, I'll be focusing on 3 case studies or 3 types of media and technologies. The first one you probably recognize is the landline or telephone hotline. And the second one is a community zine. Zine is a shorter or informal form of magazine. Well, magazines are usually commercial publications, but zines are usually do-it-yourself, small group circulations. So that's zine. And then there's also digital videos and films made by LGBT people themselves. So we need to pay attention to the historical context of their use, the purposes, the practices of their use, as well as what are some of the technological affordances that have made particular use possible, and how does it articulate identities and politics in a different way. So this is based on my 3rd and recent book, Queer Media in China. So currently available as an ebook and in hardback, and it's softback is going to be published, soft copy is going to be published actually later this year. And then this will be followed by my next book, which is on theater and performance, queer theater and performance in China, and as a form of queer activism. So let's start with a little bit of historical background for those who are not familiar. So essentially, I am writing a cultural history of China's LGBTQ activism and culture and communities in the past 3 decades. So roughly from 1990s to 2010s, 2020. So these 3 decades are important because they are a crucial formation period for contemporary gay and or queer identities, communities, and politics. Of course, you can argue that in China, since imperial China, there are hundreds of years of homoeroticism. In ancient China, people had a more relaxed attitudes towards homosexuality, and the Western notion of homosexuality was introduced actually in the May 4th era, and so on and so forth. So that has a long history, but I'm talking about a contemporary form of gay identity, community, and politics, or a more political politicized the notion of gay identity, which is identity is no longer a kind of sexual practice. It is a sexual practice, but it is also a type of citizenship that demands rights, that demands recognition. So this is the political history of the queer communities in the post-Mao China, since most people believe that in the Mao China and in the early post-Mao China, so homosexuality either didn't exist or they were hidden or they went underground. It was only in the 1990s that the gay community started to surface, started to be seen by the society. And the earliest recorded public event for gay people is the Men's World. The Men's World is a meetup group, so where gay men actually meet each other regularly and exchange information and support, etc. So this is the first actually recorded homosexual or gay club and organization in post-Mao China. And then now we are in 2020. So from 1990s to 2020, so that's 3 decades. Of course, a lot have changed, a lot have happened. So some landmark events, for example, 1997, so that's the decriminalization of homosexuality in China, which was in fact a kind of accident because the legislator deleted a term called hooliganism. So suddenly homosexuality actually became unpunishable by law. No, actually, they could still be punished actually through other means, but the default crime, default label, hooliganism was gone. So this was celebrated by the community as the decriminalization. And then 2001, homosexuality was removed from the Chinese classification of mental disorder, the 3rd edition. So this marked the depathologization of homosexuality in China. But of course, it's not complete. In China today, you can still see conversion therapy where gays and lesbians were, in a way, treated to be straight. So some other events. So you can see that ever since 2000, more and more events. There are a lot of public events, groups have been set up and so on. So in my book, Queer China, I have provided a chronology of gay public events, gay community events. So with a more in-depth chronology. But here, let's look at in a way, the height of queer activism was around the Beijing Olympics, 2008 or 9, etc. So Shanghai started its first Shanghai Pride. And then 10 years later, Shanghai Pride was shut down. So during the pandemic, but of course, it was primarily because of the kind of the reason of LGBT rather than because of the pandemic policy. And then in between, we can see that after 2005, so there has been a crackdown on feminist and queer activism. This was demonstrated by the arrest of feminist activists known as Feminist 5. And Chinese government also passed the overseas NGO law as well as national NGO law, which really strengthened control over civil society. So this is a broad picture of what happened in the 30 years. So with a short emergence of homosexuality, of the gay identity community, and there has been a fast development and proliferation of groups and events and communities and spaces. And then in mid-2010s, things started to change. So that's brief historical background. Of course, as a PhD student, when I was doing my PhD under the supervision of Professor Yang at SINI, so I learned a little bit of skills about participant observation. So went to China to conduct my field work and met some really helpful filmmakers and queer activists, and they happily accepted me into the community. And then when they asked me to help them, such as organizing panels, translating films, subtitles, or articles, and so on, I happily did so. And then I got myself involved even more and more, and I started started to organize events myself. So eventually, actually, I, in a way, changed from a kind of objective observer of the queer culture and community to a kind of participatory action research, an active, if you like, an activist researcher. So the research, the queer community history that I write about is pretty much, screened through my eyes and through my own experiences. And there are other ways to write China's community history, which I may or may not be familiar with, but this is one perspective. Okay, so talking about the 3 case studies. So we're going to talk about the telecommunication, print publication, and digital media. And they are different forms of technologies with different emphasis, which I coin them technology of identity, community, and participation. Of course, they are not separable, and often these functions are intertwined. But I emphasize different elements through different forms of media and technological affordances. So the first case study I'm going to talk about is telecommunication from the 1990s. So in the 1990s, when gay organizers or early gay activists started their activism, so how do they communicate their message? Of course, by word of mouth is one way, but of course there are other ways actually. Even if you're not in the same city, but you can still find each other and talk to each other. You can also write letters, and of course, and at that time actually, telephone or landlines have entered many Chinese households. And but they were mostly used in government offices or school offices, etc. For private household use, actually were not that common. So this is a telephone, landline, and fax machine. And then on the right-hand side, you see an earlier form of mobile phone. So in Chinese, there is a term which is called 大哥大. Literally, that means big brother boss. So presumably, actually, those who can afford this are big bosses or are rich people, and they usually talk loud on their phone in public so that everybody knows they have such a gadget. So that's kind of mobile phone. And then the middle one is probably less familiar to many of you. In fact, my students don't even know about its existence. It's called a pager. I think in American English is probably called beeper. So in Chinese it's BPG. So it's basically a kind of message carrier. So if you, for example, if I have a beeper carried around me, you can beep me through calling a beeper station or pager station, and then the staff there will send the messages to my pager, and then I'll be able to read it and then find a landline and call you back if you leave your number, if I know your number. So that's basically what the communication technology I used during my university days. So these were earlier forms of telecommunication that were used for between and or among gay people to communicate message. And of course, at that time, the house workers and early queer activists discovered that simply by talking to people by word of mouth is not sufficient. And they should be reaching more people, including people they have never met, whom they don't know. So what is the best way? So hotline is one of the ways. So if you promote a telephone number or publicize a telephone number and encourage people to call you, then they would be able to have a kind of private conversation with you. So this has its advantage because basically the caller can remain anonymous. They can hide their face, they can hide their identity, they don't hide their location. They just need to find a phone or public payphone and then call you and talk about their problem. And then you don't have to know who they are or where they are. So it has a sense of anonymity, and also this emphasis on the kind of personal communication through voice also has got kind of intimate feeling to it. And within the gay communities, of course, the hotline has a particular emphasis on identity. When people know that you are gay friendly or you are LGBT people yourself, they would in a way, be more likely to trust you. So telephone hotlines can bring people from different parts of the country together while maintaining their anonymity. So this was why that it was actually used at the time when most people, most LGBT people prefer to stay closeted. Okay, so the first HIV/AIDS hotline. So I'm talking about HIV/AIDS for good reasons, because the earliest gay organizations were actually established by public health professionals. So some public health professionals whose sexual orientation we don't know today, but they were either sympathetic or empathetic with gay people and wanted to help gay people set up this hotline actually were under the disguise of HIV/AIDS. So one of the early activists' name is Wan Yanhai, so shown here. So he established a hotline and Aijixing Health Research Institute. So the Health Research Institute basically promotes awareness of HIV/AIDS issues and help people advise on prevention, intervention, and so on. So one was one of the first group of people who realized, oh, there is such a group of people, which is gay people, and they are among the high-risk groups. So we need to communicate information with them, make them aware of this situation, and help them. So he started by running an AIDS hotline and promoted this hotline number to gay people. But of course, very few people took that call. On the one hand, very few people knew what HIV/AIDS was. On the other, who would like to actually just talk about their trouble? So soon, when changed his strategy, what he did was that he organized those meetup groups. He first, passed on those leaflets in parks, bars, and so on, where gay people frequent, saying that we're going to meet up every, for example, Saturday afternoon and so on, so in which place and so on. So the meetup group was called Men's World, and you can see that it's primarily focused on gay men. So it's called the Men's World, and people started to meet each other, and during those meetup groups, they talked about health issues. And on 14th of February, it's a Valentine's Day, isn't it? So 1993, Men's World held a Valentine's Day event at the Seahorse Ballroom. It's a dance club, ballroom dancing hall at Xidan in central Beijing, essentially. So this was the first organized public event for gay people that has been recorded so far. So this is seen as the start of the LGBT activism in post-Mao China. So they distributed Valentine's Day cards and condoms. So this news event actually was reported later by national news and international news, hailed as Chinese gay people, Chinese gay community coming out. But this brought them trouble. So basically, one was reprimanded by his superiors, and then the Xidan ballroom dance, the Seahorse Ballroom, was closed down because of this. So at least this was a beginning of gay organizing in the 1990s. So gay people were talking about HIV/AIDS and trying to meet each other, and most of them were married, so they would have to hide their identity by using pseudonyms and so on. Lesbians were having a great time in Beijing at that time, especially in eastern part of Beijing, so where the international expats lived. So Susie Jolly, the person on the left-hand side on my screen. So essentially, she was a British activist, a queer activist. So what she did was that she organized a lot of home parties in her flat. She lived in one of those 外交公寓, those foreign affairs office apartment buildings. So with more freedom and with landlines as well. So basically she organized the home parties and then attracted some Chinese lesbians, and some Chinese lesbians also helped organize local parties. They found some pubs and bars in Sanlitur district and then frequented those places and then tell everybody in the community that please come to this place. So eventually they changed one bar into a gay bar. That wasn't a deliberate arranged, not the case. And the boss realized this, but the boss was very queer friendly at the time. So that was one of the first, in a way, Chinese, Beijing's early gay bars, which is called On and Off. Okay, so that's lesbian gatherings in the 1990s Beijing. And of course, the lesbians were thinking about, if gay people have got a hotline, we also need a hotline. And our hotline would be to help everybody, LGBT groups and so on. So how would we help them? So do we have a landline? They didn't have a landline as a fixed landline at that time, but they have a beeper or pager. So what they did was that they promoted that pager number on a newspaper, in a hidden corner of a newspaper. But as soon as it was published, the pager became really busy. So they had to find landlines to call back. And most of the time they used Susie's landline in her foreign affairs flat in East Beijing. But they also had a member of staff who had a friend who has a 大哥大, the big brother bossy phone. So what they did was they call back and listen to these people's stories. And a lot of times, what gay people at that time just wanted to talk because they have nobody to talk to. They couldn't trust anybody. So listening was enough. But they all also had a lot of specific questions. So how to solve those specific questions? Those volunteers were not trained counselors or health professionals. What do? First, they invited some health professionals to give advice. And those health professionals, of course, say that, oh, you should quit your homosexuality and become straight. This will make your life much easier. And this is a much healthier lifestyle. So experts are not helping. So if experts are not helping, then gay people or queer people have to help themselves. So what they did was that they have regular debriefing meetings. They talk to people and noted down the questions and try to answer to the best of their ability. And then during those weekly debriefing meetings, they share notes and with each other and come up with some strategies. And in later few phone calls, they would be able to use those strategies to answer people. So they realized that they can't rely on experts from the outside world, and they just have to rely on themselves because they know the community the best, and community affairs or issues, problems should be solved by community members themselves. So that was an important recognition. And also with the kind of these discussion groups, with debriefing meetings, and with the interaction with strangers or non-strangers, a sense of community and shared cause started to emerge. So a bit of anecdote. So in my interview with He Xiaopei, so He Xiaopei shared a story. So once she received a phone call from a policeman. The policeman was very sad and depressed, and he was telling her, oh, I was discovered to be gay by my colleagues. What should I do? I have to quit my job. What can I do? And so on and so forth. So He Xiaopei listened to his story very calmly and gave him some advice and so on. So that person lost touch. And a few years later, they met at a national LGBT leadership conference. That's in the 2000, after 2000, 2005-ish. So that person identified himself in front of He Xiaopei, and his name is Geng Le. For those people who don't know who Geng Le is a CEO of a gay dating app called Blood. Blood is the world's largest gay dating app. So it was established by a Chinese guy. It's a Chinese company. So this is, of course, the Chinese queer community media that is better known today. But it's also really useful to remember there are historical forms of communication, such as landlines, such as pagers. Okay, so that was the first type of telecommunication. And then I'm going to talk about print publications or print magazines. So I'm going to talk about zine. So zine is basically a kind of do-it-yourself, self-made publications. Once I went to a zine making workshop. So basically, actually, one can use drawings, clipping, and a photocopier to make beautifully made zines. So the earlier zine of Les Plus was exactly made that way by a large sheet of A3 paper folded in several layers, and then their design posted and so on. You can then flip them around. So that's zine. Okay, so the zine started as a newsletter, as a formal newsletter. So before I talk about newsletter, so let me talk about the difference between a zine and a telephone landline. For telephone landlines, it's usually one-on-one communication. You talk to a different person. That person can remain anonymous, but there's still a sense of intimacy established through those kind of voice calls. And zine is a different experience. So zine is usually collective creation. A group of people create content for zines, and then they are distributed to different venues and to many people. So it's basically kind of one-to-many or many-to-many mode of communication. So they are portable and transportable. That means that person doesn't have to be based somewhere and in a fixed place. Basically, they can carry it around and they can be posted through post office to remote provinces or regions and so on. So there are many advantages to zine, and a zine actually is also a book. A book can be flipped through, they can be enjoyed, appreciated, read with pleasure, and collected. So it is a great form of, in a way, communication, because by producing and circulating zine, people establish connections with each other and imagining themselves to be this community. So the stories that they read also constructs their identities and ideas about being gay, being queer, and what's Chinese queer community like. So there's a stronger sense of community and community history through those zines. Of course, those zines are, in a way, also have their limitations, because after all, they are made for a reading public, and they're mostly circulated among urban youth. And they are mostly distributed for free, but sometimes actually they are sold at a production cost. So that means it potentially also excludes some people, but still having a beginning is a good thing. So the earlier zines started as printed newsletters. So again, it was Wan Yanhai, so the person who started the first gay meetup group, who also started a newsletter. So the newsletter is called 爱知简报, 爱知 newsletter. So for those who read Chinese, so 爱知 is a transliteration of AIDS, HIV AIDS. So still it uses the HIV AIDS prevention as the reason or excuse. And 爱知 also means love knowledge, meaning that we have to respect knowledge that is HIV AIDS does exist, homosexuality is a kind of objective existence, and so on and so forth, or despite the ideological, in a way, restraints in China at that time. Okay, so I'm showing you an example of the Ai Zhi newsletter. So this is the first page and the last page of a 6-page newsletter. So you can see everything is printed in a quite simple and also crammed way. So there is a table contents, there is an introduction of P-flag organization, there is a Q&A, how to be yourself. So essentially, there are questions about what's it like to be gay, is that a disease, and so on. The answer is very positive. It says, 走自己的路, be yourself, to follow your own path. So this is actually a very positive message for gay people. And then there's also a list of gay celebrities from China to West, from ancient times to present, from Socrates, Emperor Alexander to Madonna. So, yeah. And then the newsletter finishes with contact information as well as encouragement for donation. So that's a kind of 6-page newsletter. So as you can see, there are not many original materials. Most of them are translated sources from English language, but still being able to put them together and most importantly, circulate around. Remember, this IG newsletter was not only distributed to gay venues, such as cruising parks and bars, clubs, community centers, etc. They were also sent to government officials, healthcare offices, public health offices, and so on. And police stations as well. So in a way, actually, it reaches a kind of mainstream public. But still, actually, the main reason or the main excuse was to understand HIV/AIDS. But as you can see from this example, this newsletter is more than HIV/AIDS. It's really a kind of positive message about being LGBTQ people. So IG newsletter was only running for a couple of years. And then a medical doctor from Shandong University, Qingdao Medical University or College started this 朋友通信, friends, friend exchange. You can't see any sign of LGBT from friends, but friend is in a way a kind of friendly way to tell people that this is about how gay people get to know each other, or this is to make friends with gay people. Okay, so friend exchange still has a lot of content about HIV/AIDS. This is because it was founded by a British charity called Barry Martin Foundation. But it contains many other things. It contains a lot of original articles written by gay people. For example, it has news from China and the world about gay people. It has sections on essays and creative writing, such as short stories and poems. It also has a letter to the editor, so gay people can ask their questions, and then their questions and answers are printed actually at the end of this newsletter or booklet. So this is pretty much a small booklet form, as you can see. It's more complicated than a newsletter, but it's still black and white. It looks a bit boring, occasionally with some pictures. I want to emphasize that the distribution of this zine actually is very extensive, because this zine actually relies on, in a way, LGBT groups as well as local governments and health offices in different provinces. So let's read this line. So basically, this zine is normally distributed to the gay work team in nearly 60 cities. So that means there is one gay organization in most of the bigger Chinese cities, with 2,500 gay people in regular contact. So they are volunteers in different parts of China, in contact with a project team or editorial office, and 2,000 to 2,500 medical staff. So this was also distributed to medical staff, to mental health professionals, to Center for Disease Control, clinical media professionals, and government officials, and so on. So it was, in a way, a kind of LGBT HIV/AIDS magazine. It reached both the LGBTQ communities and the, in a way, the mainstream. This then stopped printing in 2010 for many reasons. One of the most important reasons was the funding stopped, or funding ran out. But there are also other reasons. If you think about 2010, internet was pretty widespread in most parts of China. So that means most gay people would go to the internet to find information. There are lots of gay websites, gay chat rooms, and so on and so forth. So such a ugly looking, if you like, or plain looking booklet is no longer appealing, and printing also takes a lot of cost. However, with the stop of this, in a way, health official, health professional run gay zine, so gays and lesbians themselves started to make their own zines. So an example is a less plus. So I mentioned a simple form of making zine is to use a A3 form of paper and fold it in different ways. And then you cut different pages out. So this is the first issue of Less Plus, a lesbian magazine started in 2005 by a lesbian couple. So they realized that it's difficult to be lesbians in Chinese society because at a certain age you'll be forced to get married to a man and so on. So what they did was that they produced this kind of one-page thing to encourage each other, and then they want to share their experience with their friends, and then their friends will say, oh, this is great, can I take this to more friends? So essentially they were doing the kind of printing through photocopying, but then essentially this kind of simple photocopying is not sufficient, and they need to go to a printing factory to get this printed in color and in a more professional way. So that's the Less Plus. So the example that I'm showing here, so you can see it's hand-drawn cover or art cover. And then this begins with the editor's name and an editorial, table contents. Of course, there are a lot of artworks in here. So just give you a sense of what it includes. It has lots of pictures, poetry, short stories, and of course news, essays, and contact information. So that's at the end you have got a lesbian dictionary or a lesbian encyclopedia. So that's the 25th issue of Less Plus, printed in July 2011. So Less Plus has many columns, but primarily 3 columns have persisted throughout his life course. The first one is the existence of a single person. Second, the life of 2 people. And the third, the world of a group of people. So it's about a single person, a person with partner or friends, and a person who found the community. And in later editions, it has changed those taglines into write down our own history. So there is a very strong sense of history, and shared community, a proud existence, which, it draws on the kind of gay pride politics, and a world for a group of people. So that's basically about a community. So the zine in its later years started to take up a clear political stance of as queer politics. So that's Less Plus, a long-running lesbian zine, which started in 2005 and stopped printing in 2013, with a lesbian couple breaking up and with them pursuing different life courses. But their stop printing was also because of the change of communication technologies. Think about 2013, the social media has already emerged in China and has been used by many citizens. For example, there's is a WeChat, not WeChat, Weibo, which is a micro blogging system. So in later years, Less Plus has primarily published online. And they also realized, in fact, online publication is quicker than print publications and is less friendly, is less costly, and is more immediate. So essentially, actually, the print magazine has to transform to digital magazine. So that was the life course of a lesbian magazine. But what about a gay magazine? The longest running gay community magazine in China is called Gay Spot or Dian or Le Dian. So the first 5 issues was published in 2007 or 8, hosted by a charity or non-governmental organization. It still has some sense of HIV/AIDS prevention agenda because it was funded by HIV/AIDS funds. And as you can see, it doesn't have many original materials, at least many original covers. So all the cover pictures were actually drawn elsewhere. They don't even have clear faces of people. This is because at that time, a lot of gay people don't want to come out. Who would want to be on the cover page of a gay magazine and cause stigma to themselves? But the situation changes from the issue 6. So I'm showing you on my right-hand side some beautiful pictures of gay community, GS. So this was hosted by the Beijing LGBT Center. And of course, the center has a little bit of funding. They also have the fundraising parties, and they also approach businesses actually for sponsorship. So the example that I show you actually, so that's the front page. You can see a real person started to emerge, and people started to come out on gay magazines. And then there are advertisements on the back cover and more advertisements on the back cover. And let me show. So that's table of contents. I know that you can't see it clearly, I apologize, but I'm just showing this to give you a sense of the kind of the look or the feel of the zine. So articles, some pictures, artworks, and all of them are original or originally translated into English, and photography. Okay, so the magazine ends with a list. This list actually is very, well, in a way, is very useful because it is a list of the pickup points. So this means whichever city you are, you can go to those locations or call those telephone calls to get your own free copy of the magazine. So the magazine is circulated for free in gay commercial and gay community venues. And the magazine was very, in a way, ambitious at the time. So it calls itself Chinese Gay Story or Independent Queer Zine with the sharpest opinion. So it was ambitious, but it has to fight for existence because printing cost money. And around 2013-ish, and they had to change online, and they changed their strategy. Basically, they started to print small books, small self-print books. So this is one of the books. This is the queer literary issue. So they've collected some poems and essays and stories and so on. So this book has about 300 pages. So a typical gay magazine probably has about 80 to 100 pages. Okay, so they changed their strategy and started to organize creative writing workshops and encouraging queer identified authors to write their stories and then collect the stories for publication. So that's the second one. So let me first check. Mayfair sends a message saying only 20 more minutes. So I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to wrap up this section really quickly. So most people are familiar with digital video and films. In fact, I mean, most of China's sixth generation filmmakers have used digital videos and films to work. So the advantage is that they don't have to apply for permission. They don't have to be affiliated to a film studio. They can make their own films. And at this time, independent filmmakers also started actually to shoot the lives around them, shoot the lives of marginalized people which cannot be presented or represented on mainstream media. And of course, among those queer filmmakers, there are also gay filmmakers, or they also shoot actually topics with gay community life and gay nightlife. So New Beijing, New Marriage is such an example. So essentially, it's a flash mob type of community events. So people who are dressed up as two brides or two bridegrooms went to center Beijing near Tiananmen to take wedding photos. Of course, they're not real couples, but this is just a type of performance in public. So a filmmaker, two filmmakers, Fan Popo and David Zheng, documented the whole event. And then they also interviewed the passers-by about their attitudes towards homosexuality. So this is actually a really performative type of documentary, a type of social intervention, and in a way, a form of art activism. And such strategies are used by many other filmmakers. They make their own films and organized film festivals and film screenings and so on. So I'm now going to wrap up my talk, since the queer film part is probably more familiar to most of you. So let me just sum up by saying that we have seen a brief history of queer community media. We have also seen the specific features, characteristics, and technological affordances that really encourage and foster different types of identities, communities, and politics. And by studying queer community media, we see a different type of Chinese media that often get missed actually through mainstream narratives, because even in Chinese media and communication studies, we talk about Chinese media being controlled by the government or being commercialized and so on. It does seem that another aspect of media needs to be considered, that is the community, citizen, grassroots, and alternative use of media serving community needs, not aiming for, in a way, reaching the general public, but consumed within the communities and for its activist purposes. So that's all for my talk. So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to raise the questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you, Mayfair.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we learned a lot about the dynamic queer community ongoing in China and the way that they deploy media to construct identity and community. I will let you field your own questions. I think those of you who would like to ask a question of Professor Bao, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We already have one question.
Yep.
So you can go ahead and answer that one, and any other ones that come up, you can take care of them.
Okay, great. So this question from an anonymous attendee asks, hello, this seminar so far has covered a lot of gay men-focused information with some focus on lesbians. What about people who are transgender or just queer? So this is a great question. So I think that the history that I've just shown actually is a good illustration of the social construction of identities, social construction of gay identity, queer identity, and lesbian identities. Those identities were not always there. They are not a priori. So the same is true with transgender identities and with queer identities. For example, take queer as an example. The term queer was only translated in Chinese language in mainland Chinese context in 2001 with Li Yinghe's publication of 酷儿理论, a queer theory, and later it was used in queer arts and activism, film, etc. So before that, we can probably talk about sexual minorities, but this self-identification with queer didn't exist prior to this historical moment. So this also has implications about how we think about trans identity. And today we hear about, in Chinese, we can hear about 跨性别, transgender, or 跨儿, trans, which in a way actually got widely accepted in the queer communities and sometimes in mainstream public as well. But let's remember that although gender ambiguity and gender transience always existed in history, transgender as a form of self-identified identity and politics only had a very short history in China as well as in the West. And there is a book called Inventing Transgender, which sums up this kind of the journey of the transgender emergence of transgender identification in American history quite well. So yes, today there are trans groups in China, there are trans media in China, but this history was relatively short, and I would say that probably we should actually trace to 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So the term trans in the mainland Chinese context came as a package of LGBTQ. So with the LGBT activism, so there is a need to identify who is L, who is G, who is B, and who is Q, and so on. So with those internationalization of queer rights movement, as well as sexual discourses and sexual knowledge, identities have started to emerge, and identifications have also started to emerge. And then media and communication technologies are used to communicate these identities. So this is not a straightforward answer, but I hope that I've in a way explained how to think about this issue when we are looking for trans community magazine or queer community magazine. So an important queer community magazine, I would say, is 酷拉时报, Queer Lala Times, which was which started in 2011 or 12. So at that time in mainland China, there was a debate within queer community called Pretty Fighter debate, which marked the demarcation of gay identity politics and queer politics. And the queer politics supporters started their own publication, which is called 酷拉时报, Queer Lala Times. So thank you for your question. And Lin Shan's question is next. Shall I continue, Mei Fei?
Yes, go ahead. And
okay.
You can pick whichever question you'd like to deal with. You don't have to pick every single question. Yes.
Yeah, all these questions are great. So I'm just mindful of time. Let me try to answer some of them. So Lin Shan's question is, you mentioned toward the end of the talk, these media are more towards LGBT communities themselves. I'm curious if there are efforts to change the social stigma as well. Yes, there are efforts to change the social stigma. So I think that within the queer community, there are also debates about whether we need positive representation. For example, both GS and Queer Lala and Less Plus have tried to present a positive image of to be gay or to be lesbian. But Queer Lala Times, the thing that I mentioned just now, actually, well, you really fought against this imperative. They were saying that, so gay people, queer people are as diverse as straight people. So why do we have to be model citizens? Why do we always have to be middle class, rich, beautiful, and so on and so forth? So yes, this was discussed within the queer communities. And in the general, society, I think that there are increasingly media representations of queer people or gender diverse people, although they are not named or explicitly named LGBT as such. We can see in the past 10 or 20 years, there has been more and more positive representations of queer people. Of course, the stereotypical representations such as gay, sissy boys, and so on always existed. And the lesbian murderers also existed in films and so on. But increasingly, we see more and more, supportive representations, which is pointing towards the right direction. The next question is from Wang Yang. Are students within Changsha Club actually members of the queer community, or are they straight people that wanted to support gay communities in China? So I don't know the exact answer, but I would think that the lines between queer people and non-queer people are sometimes blurred. So who are queer people and who are non-queer people who are supporting queer people? So yes, in Changsha, that university has an LGBT student club, which they call Rainbow Club. The members are probably, most of them are LGBT students, but there are also straight identified students. So in Chinese, there is a term called 直同志, which is straight queer or straight comrades. So essentially, it's used to describe the allies of queer people. So whoever your identification is, as long as you support gender and sexual diversity, you're welcome to join the movement or activism. So that would be my answer to this question. So the next question is again from Wang Yang. I cannot stop concerning the public street protesting is very abnormal for Chinese people. So I'm afraid if gay pride protests would successfully emphasize the ideal ordinariness of being queer, that is 同志一般人, is not the ordinary way. Yes, I think I absolutely agree with you. It's not the ordinary way. Even within the queer communities, most people would frown upon the idea of public demonstration and protest. Most people realize that in China, you've got to think about its specificities. For example, Shanghai Pride, we call Shanghai Pride a pride event, but it's probably very different from the kind of queer event that you see in San Francisco or Los Angeles, etc. It has a lot of cultural activism, such as music concerts, film festivals, cultural art exhibitions, etc. In other words, cultural activism. So that's essentially my argument for my book, Queer China, especially. These queer community events and cultural activities functions as a type of activism, taking into consideration of the political constraints of political activism in China. And in fact, this kind of cultural activism is more open in terms of identities, and they're more flexible and more creative. And in a way, actually, they go beyond a rigid sense of gay identity politics, which would also, in a way, interpolate the queer allies. So that it is not normal, and it's far from normal. In fact, within the queer communities, most people would think that there has to be other ways to articulate your identities. For example, flying rainbow kites is one of the ways that local queer community group has come up. So nobody can stop you from flying kites. If a kite is rainbow colored, then most people would probably not think of anything, although the rainbow sign has become increasingly politically sensitive in recent years. So the next question, the next two questions are from Granger Branneman. So the first one is, queer culture in China today sounds a lot like queer culture of the West between the Stonewall riots and the AIDS crisis. Would you say it's a fair assessment, or are there critical differences between modern Chinese queer culture and queer culture in the 1960s and in Europe and so on? So this, an easy answer is that they are different. So from a kind of epistemological perspective, the time is different. So essentially, the Chinese queer culture and activism are exposed to the particular transnational cultures and local cultures of the 21st century. For example, in the 1960s and 70s, whatever, New York, San Francisco, certain issues such as trans issues, etc., would have been talked about in different way as it is today. And the term queer would probably have more negative associations than today when it has been appropriated. Similarly, in the Chinese context, so today's context actually has to be, in a way, subject to the kind of technological environment. For example, we see today's queer expressions mostly on social media, whether it's WeChat or Weibo or TikTok, etc. And in fact, TikTok is shaping queer identities in particular ways. This is because it functions towards on the basis of algorithms. So the more queer content you watch, and the more you're likely to get, and even your whole whatever TikTok page would be full of queer performances or queer content, and to create an impression that this world is a queer-friendly world. But actually, in reality, most parts of Chinese society probably wouldn't consider homosexuality or queer issues as normal. So yes, I mean, today's environment is shaped by its particular policy, technological environment, as well as cultural context. For example, in today's queer communities, there is a split between the queer cosmopolitanists and queer nationalists. A group of queer nationalists who are essentially very patriotic, and they would probably purge other gay groups and accusing other gay groups of being catering to the Western gays or whatever, manipulated by the Western powers and so on. So it's different context. So we really need to look at all those situations differently. Although there are some historical experiences to draw on, but these issues have to be discussed in a contemporary context. Second question from Granger. The CCP and Chinese state seem to tolerate queer organization and cultural identity in a very limited way, to the extent that where it's not openly repressed, but prevent the LGBT movement from being politicized. Why does the CCP resist cultural liberalization of queer rights? And besides classical social mores, and besides his appeal to classical pre-Xinhai revolution Chinese values, do you expect a backslide in that balance, tolerance does exist in Chinese law and society? So this is a complex question. I think the best way is to say that, well, there are different modes of governmentality that have different priorities. Unfortunately, the current Chinese administration has chosen to relate queerness or gay lifestyle to Westernness. And in a world where there's a lot of cultural antagonism between China and the West, this was in a way heightened by the kind of US-China trade war and political tensions and the pandemic politics and so on. So it's more likely that within China, we see a kind of polarization of China and the West, seeing them as increasingly incompatible. So this takes an expression of pandemic policies and politics, but this also actually can affect feminists and queer activists. And of course, in China today, actually, one can live a life as an individual, private person, gay person, probably not without much trouble, but that is very conditional because still there's a lot of social mores and pressures. At a certain age, people would be concerned about your marriage. And of course, this marriage means heterosexual marriage. And it's still a very much conformitist culture for older generations, and younger generations are breaking away from those norms. But I think that it takes some time to change. So that would probably be my slightly pessimistic answer at this particular historical moment. Strangely, a few years ago, I would probably be able to give you a more optimistic answer, but at the moment, I see this as in a way, as a low point in China's queer activism, feminist activism, and probably we're going to wait for a longer time to see a kind of more rapid development of queer culture and activism. So that's all for my answers. I think I've answered most of the questions. And Yang, ask a further question. Can you name some queer-friendly and queer-tolerant Chinese cities other than Beijing and Changsha? What factors determine their tolerance? So first, of course, the term tolerance is problematic, but that's a different matter. So other cities, such as Guangzhou, is often known as a queer-friendly city. And Chengdu is often known as a queer-friendly city because people in Chengdu seems to have a very relaxed way of life and less politicized and so on. So it really depends. Most people would think that small cities and countryside are more hostile towards gay people. But I think He Xiaopei's documentary, Our Marriages, demonstrates that actually in smaller cities, the lesbians can live together in a way, in a more comfortable way. They came out to their parents and they were accepted, well, tolerated by their neighbors. Still, there are gossips, but people seem to have accepted that they are, in a way, respectable people, or they are indeed normal people, ordinary people. So a question from Ursula. Thanks for the talk. Can you address the aftermath of sexologist Li Yinghe's efforts to propose same-sex marriage bill to National People's Congress? Once Chinese People's Consultative Conference spokesperson responded saying the project was still ahead of the time, which could potentially be interpreted in a positive light. What societal factors do you think would need to change before equal marriage would become a reality in mainland China? It's a difficult question to answer because, of course, the same-sex marriage proposal was proposed once again, actually, in 2019. We even got shortlisted among one of the few top proposals, and the NPC Congress spokesperson had to acknowledge this. This was, in a way, an effort from civil society groups to make social changes through legislative way. So in other words, if other types of activism is not possible, what about impact litigation? What about lobbying for social change? Still in China, there is not a developed lobbying system. So I'm not optimistic that this would actually, in a way, succeed. But I think that what's most important is to change the attitude of the whole society, so that the congressmen or the people in the Chinese People's Congress Consultative Conference and so on can accept that this is indeed not such a ridiculous proposal. At the moment in China, actually, there were a lot of conservative backlashes. For example, the reinforcement of gender norms. Men have to be men, boys have to be boys, and so on. This is extremely detrimental to gender diversity. So I think I'll stop here and pass on the mic to Mayfair.
Well, thank you so much. You answered so many questions, so I think it's time for us to draw this to a close. So we have recorded this whole session, and I will, you can, if you would like to see it, you can contact me, and I will certainly allow our class, our large lecture class to have access to this recording. And I'll find another way to make this accessible to others. So thank you so much, Professor Bao. Yeah, you've really enlightened us and given us a peep at what's going on in China. Even though you're a bit pessimistic at this historical moment, you know, a lot of things can change very rapidly. We've seen this, and I have been in China since 1981. When I first went to China, and I've certainly seen so many eye-opening, dramatic shifts and changes. So who knows? Yeah, and
that's a positive note.
Yes, yes, right. Okay, so great. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting today's events, and thank for all the wonderful questions and discussions. So I hope to see you in person someday.
Yes, hope to have you in Santa Barbara sometime. Okay.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.